Hey, in this video tutorial, I'll be showing you how to bring in a 3D object and line it up against this photograph taken of this street scene here. Now, the purpose of this is to use a live backplate, in this case, this photograph, laying out in Blender, and then bringing in the 3D assets so that the perspective matches the backplate photo. Okay, first, let's take a look at the photo. So this is the original photo and was taken with a full frame camera. And if you look at the exit data, you can see that it's taken with a 5D Mark III on a focal length of 27 millimeters. So right now this image is a little bit big at 4,898 pixels by 3,265. So I need to reduce it down. Otherwise, if I bring it into Blender with this size, it's going to take some time to render. Okay, so I'm going to drop this into Photo P. If you have Photoshop, you can use Photoshop to change the size, but I'm going to use the web-based Photo P to resize the image. So this is the previous one that I worked on, so I'm going to close this. Then I'm going to drop the original image into Photo P. And you can go to image size. We're going to reduce it to about 40% of its original size. So go to image size, change it to percent, and we're going to reduce it to 40%. Then we're going to save this image, export it out as a PNG, then save, and then save as the street shot resized. So I'm going to override this since I've done this earlier on. Now we're going to go into Blender to do the perspective lineup. So I'm going to start from new. Now you can actually line this image up by looking through the camera and bringing it in. But in order to make sure that the lineup is much more accurate, I'm going to use another software called Fspy. Now you can go over to fspy.io to download the software. Okay, download the version that is suitable for you. And then you must also install the add-on for the Fspy importer. So you can click on this link and then go and download the latest version of the Fspy add-on. Go to Blender, go under the Edit Preferences, under the Add-ons category, and click on Install to install the Fspy importer. Okay, so you don't have to unzip the Fspy add-on file, just click on it and install the add-on. So once you have installed it, we're going to run Fspy. Now Fspy itself also comes in a zip file. So this is what the file looks like when it's downloaded. And what I did was just to unzip the Fspy and then run the program in the executional. So I placed the executional shortcut on my desktop. So when you run it, this is what you see. Okay, and you just need to drag and drop the photograph into this shot. So I'm going to drag the resized version into the shot, or rather into Fspy, and then I'm going to do my lineup. So Fspy is pretty easy to use. You can drag these lines and find the straight lines that form the disappearing horizon. And because this is a picture of a road, we can easily find out what are the straight lines that converge to form the disappearing point, to form the vertices, or rather form the perspective. Okay, but the problem is these x-axis lines, right, will be quite difficult to get to line up because we can't find the exact parallel lines across here. So one way would be to change, instead of lining up the x-axis, we're going to line up the z-axis on these lampposts. So for the x-axis, you can come over here, the vanishing point axis. I'm going to change it to the z-axis. Then I'm going to use this lamppost as my reference. Yeah, nice and straight. Then I'm going to use this wall here. It is building wall over there to line it up like that. Okay, so if we take a look at the original photograph, we know that okay, let me just close all these copies. We know that the original focal length for the full frame camera that was taken on for this picture is 27 millimeters. So we can check whether our Fspy has it done a good job lining it up by going over to the focal length and clicking on the checkbox here. And we get a 30 millimeter lineup result for the focal length, which is actually not too bad. So you can actually tweak this further. You can make sure the lines line up a little bit more, and you might get a result that is closer to 28 millimeters. Right now, I'm just adjusting this to line up the wall, and I got a result that is about 28.59. Okay, so you're going to get if you're lining this up using Fspy, right, you're not going to get the exact result that was listed on the uh, EXIF data for the photo. But I think for this one will be good enough. Okay, so I'm just going to adjust this a little bit more. Okay, so even if it's off, as long as the perspective looks right, the orientation looks good, I think we're good to go. All right, so for my lineup, right, I'm getting a result of 33.2. We can turn on the 3D guide by turning on a box, and you can see whether the uh, perspective lines are converging into a single point, and it seems to be happening so. So I'm going to open up this, or rather import this Fspy lineup into Blender. So let's save this Fspy file first for the street lineup. For the street lineup 2, then you must add a .fspy extension so that Blender can recognize this. Okay, so we already activated, or rather we already installed our Fspy add-on, and we activated it by clicking on this checkbox. So now we're going to first delete away the camera, because later when we import in, and also the cube, you can press X or delete to delete away the camera and the cube in the default Blender scene. Because we don't really need the camera, we'll be importing in the camera from our lineup. So click on File, Import, Fspy, then go over to the folder containing the street lineup. So I'm going to bring in this one. Okay, let me check whether this one was it the latest version? Okay, I think maybe I'm just going to overwrite my previous lineup. Street lineup, I call it street lineup 2. Just overwrite this. Okay. So street lineup 2, and then import. And then you can see we managed to bring in the lineup, but you can see that the grid, right, is above the road. Okay, we need to bring the grid down so that it lines up with the road here. So first, we need to activate our transform pivot point to 3D cursor. And with the camera selected, okay, we can use the move tool, okay, by clicking here, and then grab on the blue arrowhead and then just drag it up. The blue arrowhead represents the z-axis. So I'm just going to drag and then push it up until the grid lines you see here are all lined up with the road. So now the floor is actually lined up with the ground level here. Okay, so next we want to increase the brightness of the backdrop here. So since our camera is already selected, you can click on camera, the camera properties, and click on the drop down for background images, and then bump up the opacity so that we can see the full brightness of the image. Okay, so now we can lock the camera. So go over to the object properties, and then under the transform and rotation values for the location and rotation values, click on the lock symbols to lock them so you don't accidentally move the camera. Right, next we want to bring in our 3D object. So there are many ways that you can bring in a 3D object. You can go online, you can go to Sketchfab, right? For example, let's see, we go to Sketchfab and download a free model. So make sure you register an account with Sketchfab. So I already logged into this website. Then you can look for, let's say, a free car model. And let's settle for this Porsche. Okay, I already downloaded this model before. So if you click on it, they'll give you several options to download this model. So the thing is, although this model is, you can click on the download link here. Although this model is already done in Blender, I'll recommend that you download it in this GLTF format and just download this. So already download this version, and I'm going to bring in that Porsche into this scene. Okay, so of course there are other ways that you can bring in 3D models. You can also use 3D Paint. If you are using Windows, you can go to the 3D library, and then you can search for vehicles. And then once you pick a vehicle that you like, for example, this black ice cream truck. So right now it's downloading the model into my scene here. Okay, this one is taking a little bit long. Let me just cancel it. Let's see if we can download a different truck. Okay, maybe the internet is a little bit slow today, so I'm gonna cancel this. Okay, now it's downloaded. So you can save this one by going to menu and then save as 3D model, and then I'll call this the red ice cream truck. I got a previous one that's downloaded, so I'm gonna download this as red ice cream truck and save. Okay, so now we can bring in the two vehicles, the Porsche and the ice cream truck. So you can click on File, Import, then click on the GLTF, then go over to the folder containing the models. I'm going to bring in the red ice cream truck first, import it, and you can see that the ice cream truck, right, is right at the bottom of this, or actually it is sinking at the bottom of this grid line here. So you can press S to scale it up first, okay, and then use the move tool to move it up until the wheels is approximately at the grid line. Now, if you cannot see the grid line, you can always switch to the left view. Okay, click on view here, go to the different views. Viewpoint, you can go to top left or right, or I like to use the tilde key. Press the tilde key and then press the right view. And then you can use this to line up the wheels until it is at the ground level. Okay, so remember our move tool right now is lined up to the cursor, so we want to change it back to the median point so that we can select and move the vehicle where we want. Okay, then now we switch back to our camera view. So you can click on the camera icon here to switch back to the camera view. So if you want to see the materials on the ice cream truck, you can just press Z and then switch to material preview. Okay, and now we want to bring in the Porsche. So we can go to File, Import, and go to GLTF, and we're going to look for the Porsche, which is inside this file, which I previously downloaded, and then go ahead and import it. Now the Porsche, we need to work on it a little bit because, okay, now you can see the, when you import in items, right, the whole vehicle will be selected for you. And it even comes with its own shadow catcher map as well. But we can see there are some issues with this 3D model. So let's go and work with it. So let's just isolate this model first. So we can click on view and we can go to local view, toggle local view. So we just focus on this imported Porsche. Okay, right now you can see that there is a bottom with this fake shadow catcher. We can select this and we can delete this, press X to delete it. And also on the Porsche itself, there are several other meshes. You can just click on it and remove it. Okay, for example, this piece here, we can press X to delete it. Okay, it could be, let me check this. It could be a reflection surface. Let me undo that. Oh yeah, okay, it is a reflective surface. So I think I'm going to leave it there. So the only thing that I deleted is that floor object, okay, that create the fake shadow. And also again, you can see for this Porsche, the wheels are not lined up on the grid floor. So what I'm going to do is left mouse click and drag and select all the pieces. Then again, press tilde and go to the right view or front view. Then with the move tool activated, just move the Porsche until the wheels are touching the green line, which represents the floor level. Then we click on the camera again. And then we can change our view back to toggle out from the local view. Okay, then now we can move our Porsche. Our Porsche still seems a little bit big, so we can scale it down a little bit by pressing S. Okay, move your cursor out first and then press S to scale it down slightly. Okay, now when I scale it down using medium point, that means right now the wheels is not touching the ground anymore. So I'm going to switch over to the right view or front view. This time I'm going to use my front view, and then using the move tool, and I'll just move the vehicle down until it reaches here. So depending on the model that you bring in, right, some models will come with its own route, which you can select. In this case, the ice cream truck has its own route, which I'm going to select, and I'm going to scale this down as well. So with the route selected in the outliner, you can just press S, scale it down, then use the move tool, and again, just drag it until the wheels are touching the ground. Okay, so now we're going to switch over to the camera view again. And now the size looks much more, makes more sense. Okay, so if you want to make sure that this vehicles, right, look as if it belongs in the scene, you will want to try to avoid having the vehicle go over the shadow area here, because that means we have to create our own fixed shadows, right, to cast on top of the surface of the vehicle. All right, next, in order to add on the realism, we need to create something called a shadow catcher. So these vehicles, these 3D elements, right, need to cast shadows on the ground. So we're going to create a plane. So Shift A, then go to Mesh, and then choose the plane. We're going to do one more time. Shift A, then Mesh, and then create a plane. Then move your cursor close to the center of the plane, and then press S, and then drag it out. Okay, I'm trying to make it as big as possible. I'm going to switch over to my top view. So press tilde key, then choose top view. Now, if you don't know where's your tilde key is next to your number 1 in your top row of number keys. So I'm going to go to top view. I just want to make sure that the plane is covering both the ice cream truck and the car. And for this, you can use your scale tool to scale it a little bit narrower. It's fine. And we can switch back to our camera view. And we're going to make this plane to behave like a shadow catcher. So select the plane, go over to the object properties. Now, in order for this to become a shadow catcher, we have to use another type of renderer. So if you go to the render settings, we cannot use Eevee, we have to use cycles. And now, while the plane is still selected, go over to the object properties, and under visibility, go and change it into a shadow catcher. Now, in order to see the shadow catcher working, we have to show this, look at this viewport in, now I'm zooming in a little bit. We have to now turn on to cycles renderer. So press Z, then go to rendered view. And now you can see that the shadows are being rendered. Okay, but the shadows are actually being cast by our only light here. So if I grab the light, and if I press G, G is to grab and move, press G, then move your cursor, you can see that the light is causing the shadows to change. And because this is a single light source, okay, the shadows are cast based on its position in relation to the vehicles. So in order to have a much more convincing looking shadow, and since this is taken outside on a hot sunny day, anyway, this picture was taken at 1 p.m. So the sun was relatively high up in the skies. At least in Singapore, right, should be almost like a noonday sun. So I'm going to change this light into a sunlight. So with the light selected, go over to the light properties and change it. Now the strength 1000 is too high. We're going to bring it down to 1. And then the angle is a little bit too high because you can see the shadows are too soft. So I'm going to bring the shadow angle down to maybe 2 degrees. So now you can see the shadows are now much sharper. And you can manually rotate the sunlight. Now, for the sunlight, it doesn't matter. I'm going to use the move tool here. It doesn't matter where you put the light. The matters is the rotation. If you go to the rotation and you rotate, you can actually control the look of the shadow. Okay. Now I'm adjusting the light so that it's like pointing almost down onto the ground. But if you look at the lighting and the shadows, right, it doesn't look very convincing. It doesn't look like it belongs to this picture. So there are a couple of things we can do. Okay, first, we are going to turn on something called transparency in the films or the render setting mode. If you go to the render properties and you look under film, there is this transparent option which we can turn on. So now you can see that the plane has become transparent, and we can see that both our vehicles, our 3D vehicles, right, are looking like is part of the background here. But the problem right now is that the overall lighting, right, still doesn't look very convincing. So in order to improve the look, we can use another type of lighting called HDR, or environmental HDR lighting. So you can go online, go to this website known as polyhaven.com. So let me just go over to the actual site itself. Then you go under HDRIs, go and download a skies image, and then search for one that has a midday sun. So in this case, right, I picked up this image here and downloaded the 2K EXR to act as my lighting map. Okay, so I already downloaded this image already, and I'm going to bring this image and use that as a lighting environment, right, to light up my 3D objects. So go over to the HDR, the world tab here, under color, change the color option to environment. It will change to pink for a short while. Then we need to specify the image, click on open, then go over to the folder containing the HDR image. So I'm going to use this one, then click on open image. See, the vehicle is, or the colors are much more vibrant. And this time we also see that there are two shadows, okay, because the environmental light itself, now in order to see the environmental light, we have to go to shading mode under the shading tab here. And then if you go over to the overlay options for all the shading, you can click and change it to scene world instead. And now you can see that our 3D objects are being lit by this environmental HDRI. Okay. So in order to see that the shadows, right, are correct, you have to change the rendering of the viewport to rendered mode. Okay, but because our transparency is on, if you want to see it with the environmental light, we can go back to the render options under film. We can temporarily turn this off, and then you can see where the shadows are coming from. It's because the sun is, in this picture, is actually casting an additional shadow. And our light over here, okay, our additional light is also casting another shadow. Like for example, I can rotate this, and you can see that there are two shadows over here. Now, if you're using the HDR and you feel that the HDR light is sufficient, right, you can actually get rid of this light. For this example, I'm going to delete this light, okay, by pressing X and then delete the light. And now the only light source is basically in this picture here. The sun is actually lighting up my scene. Okay, so now I'm going back to layout, and I'm going to go to the renderer settings. Make sure you're in cycles when you do this, and under the film category, make it. Also, one more thing you need to change is the color management. Make sure that you're using standard instead, okay? Because there are many different type of color managements here, depending on the kind of monitors you're using, and also depending on the device that you use to shoot your live plate itself. Okay, so now we can see the shadows are quite okay in terms of the brightness, but the angle seems to be off. So in order to change the angle of the shadow, we need to rotate our HDR map. So to do that, we have to go to shading, and then we have to go over to the node. Under the nodes, instead of object, we need to go and change to the world settings. And you can see that our HDR map is being listed here. Now, in order to rotate our HDRI map so that the sun will change position, we need to attach a UV texture map, texture setup, right? A UV texture setup for our image here. Okay, and we need to use a software known as the Node Wrangler. So if you did not enable your Node Wrangler add-on, you will not see it inside this tab here. To open up this tab, you just need to press N or click on this arrow here. So to activate your Node Wrangler, just go over to Edit Preferences, go to Add-ons and look for NODE, and make sure you check on the checkbox for Node Wrangler. Then this Node Wrangler will appear. And now we can enable the Add Texture Setup. Okay, so the shortcut is Control T, but I'm going to use this. Select your image, your HDRI image node, then click on Add. Okay, then now we have our mapping options, and then under the rotation, we're going to rotate under Z-axis. So to make this a little bit clearer, I'm going to turn the transparent off again for my render settings, so that you can see what happens when I rotate the Z-axis. So click on the Z and then drag. Then as I drag, you can see that the sun position also changes. And now the sun is like direct above our 3D objects. Okay, so now that is done, we can go over to back to our layout. Again, I need to turn back on my transparent again. And now you can see the shadows are looking much nicer and the colors are much more vibrant and it seems to be matching the environment much better. Okay, so now how do we render this out together with this image? Now, if you press F12 to render, you will notice that it only renders the vehicles and then the shadows. And also the rendering, right? If you find that the rendering is a little bit too slow here, now you can say it's rendering 4090 samples. It's going to take a while to render. So I'm going to show you a way to speed up the render. So I'm going to stop render by pressing Escape now. So if you go over to the render settings, okay, let's check. Okay, we are rendering at 1959 pixels. Okay, at least it's much smaller than the 4000 pixels in the original image. Okay, if you go over to the render settings, I'm going to switch over to GPU compute, which is going to use my graphics card to render, so it's much faster. So not all of you will have this feature. If you're using an integrated graphics card, unfortunately, you will have to use the CPU compute. All right, so I'm going to scroll down, and instead of 4096 samples, I'm going to just use 256. And then I'm going to enable denoise, okay? And then right at the bottom for the advanced performance here, and instead of 2048 for the tiling, right, I'm going to change it to 256 for the tiling. All right, so this is just going to speed up the rendering way much faster. So right now, I'm going to press F12 again, and you should be able to see a much faster result. So it's going to finish rendering first, then it's going to put denoising, and then it's going to give us our denoised image. So this is the image that we will be required to composite on top of our image here. Okay, so we can actually save this out and then composite it using an image editor. So which is what I'm going to do right now. Go to image, save as. I'm going to call this the CG elements or street elements underscore elements and save. Then I'm going to go back to my photo P, which is still on my browser. And I'm going to bring in those CG elements and then put it back onto this image here. So I'm going to click on File, Open. And I'm going to look for the CG elements, which is saved as my PNG file. And I'm going to open it. Then press Control A, Control C. Then go over to this image here and then press Control V. Okay, but one thing you'll notice is that the shadows are really, really dark. And although the brightness of the vehicle, everything looks pretty okay. Okay, so this is the issue of saving out as a CG element. Sometimes, right, you artificially darken the shadows, okay, due to the color settings. Okay, so what we can do is that instead of compositing this CG element on this backdrop, we can do it in Blender directly. Okay, because on Blender you can see the shadows here are not really as dark as compared to the shadows that we brought in here. And even then, if we come over here and we go over to adjust the layer, if we go to image adjustments and we go and play with the brightness and contrast, it's just going to adjust the whole image. And in fact, it's hardly touching the shadows at all. So I'm going to show you a couple of ways that we can fix this. Okay, first, we are going to try to render the elements and the shadows separately. So we're going to render two different passes. Okay, so first, in Blender, let's go to Blender, and we are going to the theme properties here, which is, or rather the layer properties, and we're going to enable the shadow. Well, actually, we're going to enable shadow catcher. All right, we're going to look at the shadow catcher first. So we're going to do a render pass again. So go ahead and render the image, or you can press F12. So what it's going to do is that it's going to render pass the combined render pass. Now you can see that it renders without the shadow. So this will be a separate pass, and then it's going to render the shadow pass, and then it's going to combine everything together. So if you click on this drop down menu, you'll find that it has a combine, it has a shadow catcher, and you can see the shadow. And then it also has the noisy image, which is the original image before denoising, and also the noisy shadow before the denoising. So all we want to save is the shadow catcher and the combined image, okay, of the denoised image. So first, let's save this image pass first. Image save as. We're going to call this street elements. We're going to override the original street elements. And then I'm going to go over to shadow catcher. And then I'm going to save as, image save as, street element underscore shadow. And save. Okay. So now we go back to our photo P. And we're going to get rid of this layer. And we're going to bring in our shadow layer first. So click on File, Open. And we're going to click on Street Elements Shadow. And then we're going to select all by pressing Ctrl A. Press Ctrl C to copy it. Then go over to our street image and press Ctrl V. And you will paste it over as a second layer. However, you can see that the white is now overpowering or covering up the street in the lower background here. So we need to change the way or the mode that this image is being displayed. Instead of normal, we're going to change it to multiply. So now you can see the shadow, right, is shown here. Now the good thing right now is that if you feel the shadow, right, is too dark, we can go over to the opacity, and then we can reduce the opacity. So we can adjust the brightness of the shadow. Next, we bring in the street elements. Okay, so the street elements, which is this one. And then same thing, press Ctrl A to select all, then press Ctrl C to copy everything. Then go over to the street elements, or rather our image layer, and then I'm going to press Ctrl V to paste it over. So right now you can see that we have our shadow layer, which I'm going to rename by double clicking, call this shadow, and then double clicking on this, I'm going to call this the elements, CG elements. Right, so now this gives you a lot of flexibility. For example, like what I've shown you earlier, you can change the brightness of the shadow by adjusting the opacity. Okay, you can also change the brightness or color of the CG elements by going to image adjustments. Okay, you can go to curves, and then you can grab the curves, right, to control the contrast or brightness. So this gives you a lot of flexibility by rendering out in two different passes. Now, of course, you can do this entirely in Blender as well if you know how to use the node compositor. Okay, but I'll reserve that for another lesson. Okay, so now I will save this out, export as PNG. Then I'm going to click on Save, Save As, Street View Composited. Okay, and then we can check our image and see the final result. Okay, so we can see the shadows, everything is kind of matching the shadows, right, cast by the trees as well. And because of the HDRI map, we are able to see the reflections of the sky and the clouds, even though these are not the original clouds of this environment here. So that is how you position the lights of the HDRI, and also rendering out in passes, and then compositing still image in Blender if you want to put in CG elements. Okay, so I hope this video is helpful. and I'll probably record another video showing how to do this entirely in Blender using the compositor. I'll show you a preview of what that looks like. Let me just save this scene first. Okay, so let me just open up the previous one, and you can see under the compositing, let me just render one image. So you can actually do this in Blender itself. You use the compositor, the node compositor, and you can see now Blender just combined everything for you. So what I did was to use the compositor using the alpha over node and just bring in the image. Okay, and then you can see the rendered element is composited using the alpha over node and placed into this final image. So you can actually do this without using a image editor. Okay, we can also render out the shadow paths and then adjust it separately. Okay, that will be the end of this demonstration. Hope that this is helpful to you.